In today's episode, I have a very interesting guest, and we're going to be deep diving into marketing once again. I'm here with Jonathan Harrop, who is the Senior Director of Global Marketing and Communications for AdColony. AdColony actually recently got acquired, so we're going to be speaking about that a little bit and what that means for a Senior Director of Marketing. Just briefly on the company in itself. Essentially, AdColony is one of the largest mobile advertising platforms, reaching billions of users. And today we're here to learn more about AdColony and obviously about Jonathan's journey. So welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lucas. Good to be here.
Very good. So maybe in your own words, could you give us a rundown? What is AdColony all about?
So AdColony is a mobile ad network that was founded by game developers for game developers. So we actually recently celebrated our 10th anniversary as AdColony. Prior to that, it was a little company called Gerbo that was actually making games for feature phones, then initially games for iPhones. It actually had 12 of the first 100 apps in the Apple App Store when it launched. Very soon thereafter, our founders decided, hey, it's very hard to get discovered as an app already. Like, it was just a huge explosion. So they started sort of figuring out, how do we add value and help other developers grow in that same way? That morphed into an ad network. 2011, Gerbo officially became AdColony, and from there on, it's been growth and bringing in both brands to talk into the mobile monetization space, building tools for other developers to monetize, building out our ad network for the user acquisition folks to grow their own apps. We still have a couple of apps that we have out there just to sort of, test our technology to make sure that they don't break anything. But we're a full-on ad network these days. It's been a great journey. There's been a couple of acquisitions along the way, actually. So in 2014, AdColony was acquired by what was then Opera, placed under the Opera MediaWorks umbrella. And since then, obviously, Opera was the brand name, and the browser itself was sold to a consortium in Asia. The MediaWorks continued to work on, and AdColony sort of became Opera MediaWorks, if that makes sense. Like, we ate it from the inside because we couldn't use that brand name anymore. It's been growing from strength to strength, especially over end of 2019 through 2020. We finished last year with huge growth numbers from the previous year, to the point where, a few weeks ago, Digital Turbine acquired us for $400 million projected after the earnout.
What can I say, apart from congrats?
Thanks. It's been great, and it's really been a good rebuild story for sure. It's like any mobile ad tech company. It's not always been a smooth ride, but I think it's smooth sailing from here on out.
Very good. And is AdColony going to remain as a brand for people who know it?
Yes, that is the current plan. AdColony obviously has a very strong brand presence, especially with the agencies and holding companies that we've really done a great job of educating about the opportunities within mobile apps to advertise. And so I don't think that's something that Digital Turbine wants to lose. We've really dove into that strength for us, and I don't think they want to start from scratch again either. So that's the plan.
Very good. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about the companies and the people that actually use the platform. Like, could you tell us, what does a typical client look like? Or typical user?
Well, that's a good question. So AdColony actually has what I would call three main lines of business. So we have our publishing group, which is developers who are seeking to monetize their app. Obviously, that's the majority of apps out there right now, whether we're talking about iOS or Android. So we have a business development team that goes out to convince those guys, hey, if you want to show ads, you should be showing our ads. They're a better experience for users. We have all these award-winning creatives, and we'll give you all these, great tips about how to properly monetize. That's everyone from, the Zyngas of the world, the Glue, the Supercell, all the way down to the guy, in his basement coding in his spare time when he gets home from work. All those guys are welcome to join the monetization side of the platform. So that's one side of the business. The opposite side of that coin is the UA side. So the user acquisition side, where we go to folks who want to grow their app and say, hey, why don't you run your ads on our network with the users that we've curated within those apps that we've convinced to use our technology, and we'll help you grow that way. So that's kind of sort of that middle side. The third side is the brand business, and that operates both on a direct sold basis and a programmatic basis, where we go to the major agencies, the major brands like Disney, Toyota, Unilever, Johnson & Johnson, Wendy's, Burger King, you name it, and we go in and say, hey guys, have you heard about how great the audience is for mobile gaming? We have 1.5 billion users that you can potentially reach using our platform, and they'll we might be a value add for them. They might be primarily on our network. We really have so many different ways of working with those folks that it's very flexible. And we have a dedicated creative team to providing assets that are designed specifically for mobile. When it comes to mobile ads, you can't just take a video ad that you've thrown on Hulu or on elsewhere on the web and play it in a phone. You can, but that's not really providing an experience, and it's not leveraging the really great parts of what makes a mobile device different. So what we can do is we can take all those assets, and our creative team will build out a specific ad just for mobile phones. It could be gamified, it could be interactive video, it could be a pure unplayable, it could be a shoppable unit. The sky's the limit in terms of what we can do creatively. Just last year, our creative team won over 70 awards worldwide for different creative campaigns. We've already won, I think, about half that this year. We had a few more come in this morning, so I haven't added that to my tally. So we've been doing a great job at providing value, and I think elevating what mobile advertising is for a lot of people.
Super interesting. I would be curious, right? Obviously, you're sitting in marketing, and what are the typical channels that you work with? Like, how do you think? How do you think about the journey that marketing is defining for people, getting to start on any of the sites of AdColony?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a B2B marketer at the end of the day. So I'm speaking to a few different folks, and that's part of the challenge of working for a company like AdColony. Is on the one hand, I have all the developers who want to get the most money from every ad that they show, and that's something that we try to do. Is we try to maximize their eCPMs. On the other hand, I have to talk to advertisers and say, hey, we're going to get you the most efficient results for your spend. How little can you spend for the most results? So it takes balancing about those efficiencies and educating people where they see value. So a lot of what I do is, as a marketer, is education, and as well as creating the breadcrumbs that people see that get them to AdColony. These typically aren't very fast buying processes. They can be. It's not like software sales where it can take 18 months to get a close. But people work a few months in advance in the media space. In the UA space, it can be a few weeks in advance. It's not like a D2C business where it's see ad, purchase item, convert and close. It is a little bit longer than that. But people do research over time, and we want AdColony to be seen as an expert in the space. So a lot of what I do in marketing actually falls under the PR umbrella. So as of today, I just had a byline about connecting the dots between the polio epidemic in 1952 to the COVID-19 epidemic in 2020 and 2021, and how the Mr. Potato Head toy took over the brand new channel that had come out in 1950 in the 50s with television, and really owned that channel and took advantage of the fact that kids weren't allowed outside because they didn't want to catch polio. And it changed the advertising landscape forever in terms of how toys were marketed, how marketing worked through television. And that parallels to what we saw last year with gaming being a huge part of everybody's zeitgeist, saying, oh man, like Travis Scott did this, all these sponsorships are coming on esports. So there's a nice parallel. So that's just, I don't get anything out of that byline. There's no direct sales lead that I'm getting from it. But what's going to happen is someone's going to read that, and then when they actually need to come and use a service that AdColony has, they're going to go, oh, AdColony, I've heard of them. They know what they're talking about. Same thing goes for all of the COVID-19 research that we did last year and how consumers were behaving with regards to what apps they were downloading, what game categories were surging, who was using those. We weren't getting anything, like we didn't have direct leads from it. We did for a few things, some of our larger research pieces, but by and large, it was just purely like education. And that's what we do. And that's one of the things that I think has made AdColony a very respected name in the space.
Yeah, you mentioned lead generation there. Like, what role do you attribute to the website for lead generation?
I mean, that's where all the leads come from nowadays, right? Prior to this time last year, we would have events where we would have people come by and we'd get everybody's, email that RSVP'd. But primarily, that's fairly limited. And I think we've seen with the growth of digital events has really enabled a little bit wider reach there. But that always kind of leads into the website. So we have a research section for our website that, we do the typical thing where we gate certain questions. We lead a little bit out, so we'll do a blog with highlights of a certain report, and then we say to see the full report, click here, you go there, you fill out the form. That's where the lead comes from, and that's pretty traditional. I don't think we're revolutionizing that process, and part of that is part of it's just a time question. It's challenging to reinvent the wheel, especially when the number of leads that I get tend to satisfy the commercial teams, which is my job. So if I gave them any more, they might say like, hey, we don't have the time to service all of these. So I think we've hit a nice balance so far, but that's not, the journey's not over.
Super interesting. Yeah, you mentioned that conversion seems to be working really well on the website. Every marketer is a bit critical about the page, and it's an ever-evolving ecosystem. Like, where do you see sort of a strength of the website at the moment, and where do you see room for improvement?
So this is going to get very inside baseball and wonky. So the biggest changes that are happening to websites generally nowadays is all around privacy. So previously, a lot of the systems that we used to use for tracking and building out, this is a user profile from here, and we think they're this same person based on this cookie, and all of the things we used to do to build a user profile are slowly being eroded by cookie consent walls, by ad blockers, by just simple things like even built-in browser blocks to certain parts of this. So we routinely have to go in and sort of rework what fields we're surfacing in a form. For example, we use Pardot as our front-end CRM system. Works great for the most part. Newsletters are relatively straightforward with a wonderful template designed by my wife. I can't code. That's been helpful, but because the forms are also Pardot, it's owned by Salesforce, and a lot of ad blockers will by default block the JavaScript that those forms used to run, and that's a problem. Mm-hmm. So we have to figure out a way around that. On the other side of that, Salesforce, decided that the company they were using for their geo-IP data was not GDPR compliant and turned them off. And they gave us 3 weeks notice. And for an international company, knowing where a lead is from is really important because the guy who even in the US, I have a West Coast team, we have a central team, and we have an East Coast team. So we need to know what state they're from in order to give them to the right person. Mm-hmm. And then, you expand on that internationally to does it need to go to the EMEA guys? Does it need to go to the APAC guys? Does it need to go to the LATAM guys? So we lost that data and had to add an extra field in our forms in order to capture that. And of course, it didn't crater the lead conversion rate, but the longer you make the form, the more people drop off. It's just an unfortunate fact of web forms.
Makes a lot of sense. I would be curious, right, to switch a little bit to sort of your overall perspective on growth marketing at the moment. Where do you see the biggest challenge in terms of bringing innovation into the marketing discipline?
Software more than anything else. I mean, software is something where, as I mentioned earlier, it's a very long sales cycle. Most software companies, it's not cheap, right? It takes time to develop and maintain good software that keeps running. As an aside, we used a translation tool where the two guys who ran it, it was their side gig, and then they both got very busy with their main gig. They did the scooters in the Bird scooters. They both got hired as like chief engineers. Mm-hmm. And then instead of selling the company or doing something else, they decided to keep it running, and it just got to the point where it's like, guys, we can't get any support. We can't get any like these things are breaking. You guys aren't fixing them. We got to move on. Mm-hmm. And that took time to take that old software out and put the new software in. It takes development time. It takes planning time. It takes time for translations. So any innovation that you bring in internally within a marketing department, you have to be very careful about what you're bringing in, because it can be very difficult to take out. if it's not working. So that sort of like vetting process can be very challenging, especially if you're a purebred marketer and not super well versed in the technology vetting side of things. There are folks who that's all they do, right? And they're typically on the product side. And if I go to them and say, hey, can you vet this product for me? They go, I don't have time for that. So it turns into a learning experience. And that's something that I think if you're a decision-making marketer, you need to be able to admit when you're wrong and say this was the wrong decision and be able to backtrack, but also be able to admit when you're wrong about your initial thoughts about something, because it's everybody's inclination, especially as marketers, to be very standoffish and be as resistive as possible to the own tactics that we employ in order to get our own products in the door. So when you get a lead on LinkedIn and say, hey, check out my product, you can be a little standoffish, and you can miss some good opportunities by not at least taking the call and saying, hey, like, show me what you have to offer. You got to have an open mind to a degree, but you have to know when to say no as well. I also know some marketers who, as a personality type, they like pleasing and they like saying yes, and that's a very dangerous road to go down when you're making things like, yes, our cookie consent tool, sure, yeah, we need a new one of these. Like, you really?
Makes sense. I'm curious, you brought up the cookie consent tool, obviously quite a bit. I would say, what would you say is the biggest challenge at the moment in terms of conversion optimization, though, on pages?
I mean, being a B2B company, there is a little bit of gray area when it comes to cookie consent, because theoretically, any person filling out a form on our site is doing so as a business lead. Like, very few people are just downloading stuff for no reason. Versus, if I were selling power tools, it might be a little different because I'm an end user. So that is a challenge in terms of how do you present the cookie consent, both without making it annoying and making it effective enough to satisfy a lawyer. And that's sort of figuring out, how big do we make it? Where do we put it? When do we trigger it? Do we let people, and it's very similar to the process that news outlets go through. So if you're a news outlet, not only do you have a cookie consent, but then you also have a subscription. Hey, you need to subscribe to read this article. So you have multiple layers if you're a news outlet. But it's a very similar problem, is figuring out, I need to get the consent from this person in order to build their profile to effectively market to them, or have my sales team reach out to them, or retarget them later on if I want to build an audience on LinkedIn. So you need to figure out where you hook properly without being annoying, and how much you block. Because if you give them 2 or 3 paragraphs and then you have the consent at the bottom, that can be okay, and people can go, oh, okay, like I'm hooked, like, sure, accept all. Which, let's be frank, everyone either selects none or selects all. No one actually checks specific boxes. It's an all or nothing. And that's actually an interesting trend I've noticed from a lot of sites, is basically the button is all or nothing, which is probably the right way to go, to be perfectly honest. But I've also seen sites who just, the moment you land on them, it's here's your consent wall. And while that works well from a legal perspective, I can imagine their conversion is a little blocked, because some people just go, well, this doesn't look great, bye. And so you need to find that balance.
Cool. Yeah, since we are slowly coming to an end of today's Pathmore Presents episode, we've been, diving into the product, we've been diving into the acquisition journey, a little bit about, how you think about optimization on the page. Last question I would have is, if today would be your very first day, right, and working with the company, what's the one advice that you would give yourself?
That's a good question. If it were my first day at AdColony, I'd say the same thing that I told my intern a month and a half ago at this point. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I've yet to work at a company where people don't like feeling knowledgeable and feeling like resources, even if it's the person who sits next to you, or the person that you see on Slack that you meet during an onboarding call. Everybody is willing to help, and I think that's true of most companies. It's especially true of AdColony. It's a complicated industry. marketing and B2B marketing, and especially ad tech and media, it's not simple. It looks simple from the outside, and if I explain what I do to my parents, I can do that in a sentence. But when it really gets down to it, there's so many little nuances, and what does this terminology mean? What's a DSP? What's an SSP? What's an MMP? What's an eCPM? What's a TCPM? Like, there's so much jargon, and I don't use that term negatively. It's just industry terms of art that no one's going to know it coming in. And I've met people who've been in the industry for 15 years, and they're like, wait, what was that term again? I've not heard that one before. So don't be afraid to ask questions, and be willing to listen to the answers.
Jonathan, I really appreciate that you took the time for the Pathmo Presents episode for today.
Thanks so much. It was great being here.
Thanks for having me.